if a Martian came to Earth and you handed him the gospel and say, read this, and then you asked him, so who is Jesus? I think the Martian would say, dude, he's a healer. I don't know if Martians say dude. I just like saying dude. It's obvious. If you read the gospel and never have before, that's what Jesus is doing all the time. He heals. He heals. He heals. His very presence is healing. Through the Gospels, he's healing diseases. That's nosos in Greek. And that doesn't just refer to something wrong with your body. Nosos can also mean other ways that you don't feel right. I mean, you might not be ill, but you might also not be well. And this light and peace of Jesus just can heal us. And it's not so much about whether your arm is lame or your leg. It's that when you have a disease that can pull you away from your community. It can strain your relationships. You know, there's like Cancer World. You know about this when you're going to doctor's appointments all the time. You know about this. And it can make relationships, your very life, be different. So when Jesus heals, he's also restoring people to their relationships, their community. He's giving you your life back. I need to make sure you don't misunderstand a line in here. It says, then the fever left her and she began to serve them. Now, if you heard this wrong, it almost could sound a little bit like a SNL skit. Let me tell you. So Peter, James, Andrew, and John, and Jesus, and maybe the other disciples. So like 13 guys show up at the house and do what guys do. They sit in the living room and suddenly act helpless, right? You know what I'm talking about. So you got 13 guys in the living room, just they can't do anything for themselves. And so it looks like Peter had an idea, I can use Jesus to heal the mother-in-law and get the... And so Jesus has no guile, right? Jesus has no guile. So he goes, oh, sure. He goes in there and he heals the woman so she can wait on all the guys, right? That would be not to hear this passage correctly. She would have wanted to be part of the gathering. He's doing what he always does. It's not about waiting on them. She would have wanted to be there. It's her home to be part of that. This is how he does this. I want to lastly just focus on one phrase. Let's really draw our attention. You have it in your hand. The phrase, mother-in-law. Oh, so get this. Obviously, then Peter is married. It's his mother-in-law. He's obviously married. This is the only spot in the Gospels, the only spot that makes any reference to these guys being married. But in first century Palestine, in these villages, like 99% of men this age are married. There's not even a Hebrew word for bachelor, right? I mean, it would have been so strange not to be married. The gospel would have fallen all over itself to tell you why they're not. But it just gives this one little hint, they're married. And by the way, Jesus was probably married. Ooh, does that sound scandalous to you? It shouldn't. Why would it be scandalous? If Jesus wasn't married, you'd think the gospel would mention it. It doesn't say a word about it. Why would you think that's scandalous? To be in love with someone? To be in a loving relationship? I think only if you think sex itself and all, no matter what, even if you're married, that sex is somehow impure. Wow. Be fine with me if the Christ is in a loving, intimate relationship. Doesn't change my theology one bit. But it's amazing the gospel just doesn't talk about it. This is the one mother-in-law. That's our only clue that these folks are probably married. Never talks about it. You should watch out for what the gospel doesn't talk about. It can be very telling. So, for example, The gospel doesn't tell you whether Jesus is married or not, but it also doesn't tell you what he looks like at all. You'd think if you're telling a story about somebody, you'd mention what they look like, and the Bible does that. It says David is beautiful, for example, but the Gospels don't give you one line even about what he looks like. Why? Because it doesn't matter. It's just surface stuff. I know looks matter to us so much, but the gospel's not about looks. It's not about all these biographical details about who's married or not. The gospel also doesn't take you into Jesus' head. In our modern stories, you're always inside people's head. You know what they're thinking, and you hear them sort of run the tapes and thoughts that they have. Nowhere in the gospel do you go inside his head. Why? Because the gospel wants to focus you on what he says and what he does. Oh, don't you see with our gospel? Don't you see? The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. What's a line in a book I like? But the gospel's keeping the main thing the main thing. The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. What is the main thing? This path of compassion that he's asking us to walk along with him. This path of love and hope and justice and faith. It's that path. It's the way of Jesus is the main thing. Not what he's thinking about, not what he looks like, not whether he's married. It's the way of Jesus, that path of love. That's our gospel.
God is so good that the ancient story tells us that God came in the form of Jesus so that we would know how good this God is. It's so good that then Jesus came and spent an entire life modeling what divine life looked like. So good that the gospel writer in Mark gives us an amazing story of this God in flesh. If we only had Mark, the gospel will be a fast-flowing, intense, relentless story of a God who's constantly healing, transforming, bringing new life, exorcising demons, and bringing people back to life. Relentless in its pursuit of the way that God is at work in the world. In today's story, this healing ministry, it's so intense and so vivid that after they do this particular healing in this home, pretty quickly that healing began to be known around town. Now you can imagine in a community where they know one another that this would be kind of news. Now, today we have our phones and we can quickly know what's going on all around us. That's pretty easy. We even get notifications of what's going on around us. Recently, I was at one of our corners here, and there was a wreck that had taken place, and I was wondering what had happened. So as soon as I got to the place where I was going, I sit in the parking lot, and I asked Google. Wreck in this corner, Lincoln, Nebraska. Guess what? Google knew already. Told me that there were no major injuries. Awesome. Told me that the Lincoln police had responded. Awesome. And told me to stay away from that street. Should have asked Google 20 minutes before. The news spreads fast. In this ancient community, the news spreads fast. The healing of this one woman begins to spread in this little town. So pretty quickly what happens is that people all around town begin to bring their sick They're diseased. The folks around them who needed a touch from this God-made flesh brings them in. And pretty quickly, the scripture tells us, by the way, in a fast-moving gospel, what an interesting detail to tell us, right? That the entire town gathered around this house and brought their sick to Jesus. You can imagine if you're a neighbor or a friend or a loved one, that if you hear that this miracle maker and this healer is in your town, you too would bring your disease to Jesus. If disease is not just an illness proper, but it's a general malaise or a general sense that you're not well, or like I love to speak about, a sense that you're not flourishing, if that's what's needed, you can imagine that many would be desperate to bring those to Jesus. This entire community knew that if you help those around you who are diseased find healing, that it's not just them who are different, that the entire community is different. When one of us is made well and it gets reconnected and gets brought back to community, then all of us are better. We know this. So they bring those who need healing to Jesus. The community around them expectant that Jesus would do something. The community almost cheering Jesus on as the other person walks out the back door being made whole again. You can imagine this sight in this very moment. So he got me thinking. Now we're in trouble, aren't we? JC's thinking. What would it look like if the corner of 20th and D was known as a place where people who are diseased find healing? What would it look like if the corner of 20th and D the word began to get out, like get your phones out and begin to text your friend and neighbor and tell them, guess what? If you come to the corner of 20th and D, you might just be made well again. I began to imagine so we've been talking about folks in our community that need a healing from substance use disorders and severe mental illness. I've been sharing with you, haven't I, that this is the year of hope and that our community needs hope. And that hope means that they can see a new day, a better day. I've even reminded you about 6 months ago, in case we needed the reminder, that 24% of us in the last year have struggled with our mental health. 24%. And I told you that means that that's not something that happens out there somewhere, but that's something that's right before us, all of us together. I even reminded you that 16% of us struggle with substance use disorders. So this substance use disorder is not something that happens out there. It's something that's just like all around us. And we are talking together about what it looks like for us to be, amazingly enough, a community of healing. What does it mean for us to continue day to day the ministry of Jesus? What does it mean for our neighbors to wake up one day and know that they might not be well, that they're not flourishing, that they're not living up to their capacity, feeling like something's off within them, and knowing if I show up at the corner of 20th and D, there's good news for me. Maybe you showed up today. Oh, you might have come for the beautiful choir. I hope you did. It is beautiful, isn't it? Or maybe you came to support a loved one who's singing today. I'm glad you did. That's important. I don't know why you came, but I know that you might be diseased a bit today. You might feel a bit off. Maybe you haven't flourished in a while. And today you're here. What would it look like for this place to be a place teeming with the expectation that you'll encounter Jesus here, that you'll encounter good news, that you can walk out those doors and tell your neighbor, I once was lost, but now I'm found. You might walk out and say, I never considered it in this way, but I enter the space and somehow, some way, I am flourishing again. I have perspective again. I have agency again. I have hope again. What would it look like for us to be that place together at the corner of 20th and D? No, not because we think we're all that. No. But because like that crowd long ago, there's a teeming expectation of their shared struggle. That if our neighbors are stronger, if our pewmates are flourishing, then we are flourishing too. Out of a sense of humility about our mutuality. And all of a sudden I have a hunch that if this begins to happen in the corner of 20th and D, that pretty quickly the news agencies will be out there, and then the newspapers will want to know what is happening at the corner of 20th and D. There's healing happening. What is happening? Folks are finding freedom again and new life again and hope again and forgiveness again and reconciliation again. What is happening? People of God, I can't wait for the headlines.